conceal the very fact of our existence from the profane. If they discover us, conceal our real objective by profession of benevolence. If our real objective is perceived, pretend to disband and relinquish the whole thing, but assume another name and put forward new agents. When you hear the word Illuminati, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it this? Maybe this. Or how about this? Over the past few decades, our society has been inundated with symbols like these. They're everywhere, in TV, movies, commercials, and clothing. If you were to ask a random person on the street what this symbol means, you'll probably hear the word Illuminati used 9 times out of 10. It's become known as the Illuminati Eye and can be found everywhere from Taco Bell to soap.
Oh, Mr. Rothschild, do tell me how it feels to be the richest man in the world.
One has to be very clever to make a fortune these days.
Perhaps, but far more clever to keep it.
Really? Well, I wish you'd tell me how to make money on the stock exchange. What's the recipe?
The origins of the all-seeing eye symbolism can be traced back to ancient Babylon, where it was believed to be the symbol used by Nimrod on the Tower of Babel. God was angry with Nimrod and his people for their transgressions against the laws of nature, so he decided to scatter them across the planet and confuse their speech. From the book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 9, quote, "Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." End quote. So, when God spread the people around the world, he also changed their language, so that communication between different cultures would become nearly impossible. Without a way of direct communication, these people were forced to use symbolism to convey their ideas. This is why we see the same exact symbols spread all over the world and found in every ancient culture. And this practice continues to this very day, where we see Luciferians using the all-seeing eye symbol as a way to reveal their true intentions without saying a word. And this is the reason why the all-seeing eye symbol was taken over by the Illuminati. However, in order to understand the truth about the Illuminati, we must first take a step back in time, all the way back to February 6, 1748, when one Adam Weishaupt was born. Weishaupt was orphaned as a young boy and was adopted by his godfather, who provided him with an extensive library of over 4,000 books. And it was here where he became intimately familiar with the teachings of ancient Babylon and the mystery religions. Weishaupt would go on to graduate from college with a doctorate in law at age 20, and 5 years later he would become a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt, Germany. Weishaupt became obsessed with the Luciferian ideology he learned from studying the ancient mystery teachings of Egypt and Babylon. He envisioned a world where traditional Christian values would be replaced with those of the old world, and he was not alone. Behind the scenes, he would gain support of many wealthy men, such as Mayer, Amschel, Rothschild. In 1773, Weishaupt and Rothschild had a secret meeting at the Rothschild's family home. The objective of this meeting was to, quote, discuss world revolution, end quote. Discuss world revolution. Interesting. I wonder if there were any revolutions in the world around that time that might have changed world history.
Why come ye hither, redcoat? Your mind what madness fills? In our valleys there is danger, and there's danger on our hills. Oh, hear ye not the singing of the bugle wild and free? And soon you'll know the ringing of the rifle from the tree.
As it turns out, our founding fathers were all well-known Freemasons with the exact same goals as Adam Weishaupt. to usher in a new golden age of enlightenment. But that's another video for another day. During his time as professor, Adam Weishaupt would meet one Maximilian von Mangelas, who would go on to play a very important role. Quote, "Behind Mangelas was Moses Mendelssohn, and behind Mendelssohn was the Jewish call, the Jewish International World Government." End quote. Around the year 1765, the Illuminati had established a Berlin literary review, quote, "with the objective of propagating the pernicious doctrines of shallow Illuminism and, in that, the infancy of German literature. When this periodical had scarcely a rival to encounter, the influence it exerted was more extensive than can at present even be conceived." End quote. As the order of the Illuminati developed, so did its ambitions, which would eventually expand into a plot to first infiltrate Freemasonry, then spread to the governments and religions of the world. Using ancient magic from Babylonian traditions, the goal of the Illuminati was to usher in a, quote, "golden age of enlightenment" by systematically removing the Western foundations of Judeo-Christian values and replacing them with the teachings of Babylonian mystery schools. Its members took secret oaths, pledging an unyielding allegiance to the cause, and through a strict system of monthly reports, secret confessions, and mutual espionage, members were watched at all times to ensure total compliance. According to researcher Le Forestier, quote, "Illuminism was just as much Masonry as the system of the Rose Cross, that of the Templars, or the crowd of Masonic French degrees." End quote. Identities were disguised and members used pseudonyms to avoid public backlash. Over the next 10 years, the Illuminati would grow in size and power and become seemingly unstoppable as they continued their reign of terror. And this would continue until one fateful day. On July 10th, 1785, Illuminati founder Adam Weishaupt was walking down the road with another member, a priest, Father Jacob Lang, when something incredible happened. Something that would go on to change the entire world and shape the very society we live in today. A bolt of lightning comes down from the sky and strikes the priest, Jacob Lang, killing him instantly. In what would seem like a freak accident, the townsfolk recovered the body and placed it in the chapel of St. Emmerin, where it was to be prepared for funeral activities. That was, until one of the monks found something strange hidden in his clothes. And what would read like a scene from a modern-day spy movie, the monks uncovered a list of Illuminati members and instruction sewn into a secret compartment in his clothes. These papers were quickly turned over to the counselor of the government of Upper Bavaria. After realizing what was happening, the authorities set up a series of raids across the country. More papers were found in a variety of places and on many people, such as judges and government officials. One official, Baron Mendel, the chamberlain of the elector, was found with an iron box filled with papers concerning the Illuminati. As a result of these raids and discoveries, Weishaupt was banished from Bavaria and the order of the Illuminati was forced to disband. Or was it? Remember this quote from the beginning of the video? "Conceal the very fact of our existence from the profane. If they discover us, conceal our real objective by profession of benevolence. If our real objective is perceived, pretend to disband and relinquish the whole thing, but assume another name and put forward new agents." At this point, the Illuminati were forced to go underground. They had no choice and had to, quote, "hide in plain sight" in order to survive. And that's where they remain today. Or so it would seem. The truth of the matter is that the world today is a direct result of the plans Weishaupt put into motion so long ago. There are hundreds of secret societies operating today, all with the same goal: worldwide Luciferianism, and to usher in the, quote, golden age of enlightenment. In the 1950s, a weapon was invented that has become more powerful than America's deadliest weapons of mass destruction. It is the weapon of mass deception, and it is right in our own living rooms. The hypnotizing world of picture television brings us the news of the world through two central news agencies called Reuters and the Associated Press. The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s, which later bought the Associated Press and made the Rothschild family owners of the world's largest central news services. To the present day, the world depends on these Rothschild-owned central news services as their main source of news and information. In his book called Who Owns the TV Networks, author Eustace Mullins claims that the major TV networks, radio stations, newspapers, and publishing empires are controlled by the Rothschild, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan money cartels through their corporate conglomerates. The bankster-owned media conglomerates include weapons manufacturers, General Electric and Westinghouse, which profit from promoting wars. Control over the internet, publishing, recording, and top cable companies can be traced back to the same Big Five media empires: General Electric, Time Warner, Viacom, Disney, and News Corp. These media monopolies are owned directly or indirectly by the Rothschild, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Oppenheimer Brotherhood. Yes, there are now more stations and more media voices, but they're all coming from the same ventriloquist. Every TV show needs corporate sponsors, and corporate sponsors sponsor pro-business, pro-government programming, and journalists who support the agenda of the Big Five media owners. While 2/3 of the world goes hungry, these banksters offer gazillion-dollar sponsorships to sports athletes to play with their balls. Why? Because they keep the masses distracted from the important issues. The media and banking monopolists now have the power to make or break political leaders around the globe. Why haven't the networks made a TV movie of the week about how the Bush family made their family fortune? The movie could be called The Awful Truth, starring George W.'s great-grandfather, Samuel P. Bush, whose Buckeye Steel Castings Company supplies parts for Edward Harriman's railroads, who in turn provides rail shipments for John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, who in turn gets monopoly financing from the Rothschilds. The movie could be made into a TV series starring Samuel's son, Prescott Bush, as the managing director of a Nazi steel manufacturing plant in Poland, called Silesian Consolidated Steel. In Episode 1, Prescott Bush forwards American financing to his German partner Fritz Thyssen through the Union Banking Corporation in New York. Fritz Thyssen arranges a contract with Nazi Germany's IG Farben Company. Episode 2 shows Skull and Bonesman Prescott Bush and Avril Harriman getting caught under trading with the Enemy Act as the U.S. government moves in and seizes all of their shares in Union Banking Corporation. In Episode 3, Prescott's son, the first George Bush, is director of the CIA. George puts drug king Manuel Noriega on the CIA payroll, allowing thousands of tons of cocaine to hit the streets of America via the Panama Canal. In Episode 4, George's son, the second George Bush, becomes partners with Osama bin Laden's older brother, Salem bin Laden, in a Texas oil company called Arbuso Energy. Episode 5 introduces George W. Shady, younger brother, Neil Bush, ripping off the elderly in the Silverado savings and loans scandal that cost U.S. taxpayers $1.3 billion. In Episode 6, the Florida election is fixed by George W.'s older brother, Jeb Bush, who puts brother George into the top job at the White House, which brings us back to Auschwitz, and the concluding episode with George W. Bush visiting the slave labor camp where his grandfather helped build the Bush family fortune. The sights are sobering reminders of the power of evil and the need for people to resist evil. Ladies and gentlemen, as a follow-up to the TV series, an award show could celebrate the 20-year friendship of the Bush and bin Laden families and their shared investment in the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is one of America's largest weapons contractors. For the Bush and bin Laden families, war means profits. Big profits. Although the media creates the illusion of freedom of the press, the dominant opinion and messages always serve the banksters' agenda. The chilling reality is that up to 15% of the tax money deducted from your paycheck each month buys the bombs and pays the salaries of troops to commit these atrocities. Rivers of blood from innocent families and their children is on everybody's hands. The plan for world domination by the banksters cannot be accomplished without your cooperation. That plan was formulated in 1773 at Mayer Rothschild's goldsmith's shop by 13 influential German Jewish families. Among them were Rothschild, Oppenheimer, Warburg, and Schiff. Their formula for global control is the 3M formula: money control, media control, and military control. Like changes to the rules that gave these families the media and money monopolies, new laws are being passed to transfer military control to them by privatizing the military. But if they're killing terrorists, who cares if they are government soldiers or corporate soldiers? A more important question to ask is, who exactly are the terrorists and where do terrorists get their training? The answer is, in America, at Fort Benning, Georgia. Until January 2001, America's terrorist training school was called School of the Americas. But because of massive protests against its activities, the name was changed to WOICC, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Actor Susan Sarandon narrated a documentary film called School of the Assassins. The film exposes the school as a terrorist training camp whose graduates are well known: murderers, torturers, state terrorists, and dictators, including drug king Manuel Noriega. The role of terrorists in the bankster-owned media is to scare the living tax dollars out of citizens, and timing is everything. On the second anniversary of the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, George Bush asked for an $87 billion increase in military spending. At the same time, the media released a dramatic video showing Osama bin Laden alive and well and threatening to make the 9/11 attack seem like foreplay. How much do we really know about America's favorite villain? Multimillionaire Osama bin Laden was the 17th of 52 children, fathered by a wealthy construction baron named Mohammed bin Laden, who had close ties to the Saudi royal family and the Bush family. In 1979, the American CIA and Pakistan's ISI financed an anti-Soviet group in Afghanistan and provoked a profitable 10-year war with the Russians. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the CIA hired Osama bin Laden to recruit and train al-Qaeda fighters to fight the Russian army. But what was the fight really all about? Not carrots or potatoes. It was about poppies. Endless fields of opium poppies that provide over 70% of the world's heroin supply to heroin addicts worldwide. These are very uncomfortable issues for politicians. It was a dramatic story, but the media failed to tell us the less heroic side of Afghanistan's freedom fighters. America's new friends had become hooked on the economics of the poppy. During the war, many of the mujahideen radically increased the production of opium, the roaring gradient of heroin. Opioid abuse in the United States is at epidemic levels. This is probably the worst drug situation in our country in decades, if not a century, with deaths more than quadrupling between 1999 and 2015. The international drug trade began in 1606 when Queen Elizabeth IV built England's wealth by trafficking illegal opium from India to China. British East India Shipping Company and profited handsomely, not just from drug trafficking, but from trafficking African slaves with her slave trader, John Hawkins. I knighted her slave trader with the noble title of Sir John Hawkins. By 1830, the British had distanced themselves from dope, dealing by granting opium monopoly rights to the Jewish Sassoon family, who became known as the Rothschilds of the Far East. As an agent for the crown, David Sassoon shared his dope profits with Queen Victoria. The British East India Company built a major factory to process the opium here at Grisapur. It's still a lucrative earner for the Indian government, which sells opiates to the world's pharmaceutical industry. When the Chinese banned opium and destroyed 600 chestloads of the addictive drug, Sassoon and the British retaliated. It was a financial disaster for the British. With huge profits at stake, they retaliated with the Opium Wars of 1843 and 1858. Horses of the market were to defeat China's moral prohibition. Sassoon and the British forced drug addiction onto an entire nation, stole the island of Hong Kong, and made Hong Kong the capital of the British international drug trade. In 872, Queen Victoria knighted David Sassoon's son, Albert Sassoon, who spread the illegal opium trade throughout China and Japan. In 1887, Sir Albert Sassoon married Aline, Carol, and Rothschild, and joined the pirated fortunes of the Sassoon drug cartel with the Rothschild money cartel. Today, It's business as usual for the descendants of the Sassoon and Rothschild families, who socialize with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles as elite members of Britain's inner power circle. Many have been granted royal titles like Sir, Countess, Baron, and Marquis. But their many victims aren't fooled by the crowns, the titles, and the tuxedos. They have very different titles for them. Titles like liars, thieves, dope dealers, and mass murderers. On the other side of the Atlantic, a member of the same opium smuggling syndicate, Samuel Russell, founded Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood with drug money. Exclusive members were financed into political power positions in the CIA, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the White House. When Skull and Bonesman George Bush Sr. became CIA director in the 1980s, the CIA recruited Osama bin Laden to train al-Qaeda and Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan. The job of Osama's trainees was not just to fight the Russian communists, it was to run Afghanistan's multi-billion-dollar opium trade. Heroin, manufactured from Afghan opium, supplied $250 to $300 billion annually to Wall Street and the U.S. banks. Authors Alfred McCoy and Michael Levine tied the CIA to this unholy drug alliance and received national attention when the CIA tried to suppress their books. Michael Levine became a best-selling author when he wrote about his experience of this unholy alliance. After 30 years distinguished service with the DEA, he could write with some authority. You could look at what they did to me as an example in microcosm of essential intelligence, his actions, and the State Department in completely subverting the drug war. You know, the drug war was something that only existed in the minds of Americans, on the streets of America, for kids like my brother, for cops who died. There was no drug war. The biggest drug dealers in the world were given a license to sell drugs to Americans to support themselves, and this continued right down from Southeast Asia through the Mujahideen, through the Contras. But how was the heroin smuggled into the United States? One of America's most gruesome secrets is that during the Vietnam War, heroin was smuggled into the United States by hiding it inside the body bags of dead American soldiers. By the end of the 1960s, 1/3 of U.S. soldiers in Vietnam and close to 1 million United States citizens were hooked on heroin. Drugs like LSD, mescaline, marijuana, and hashish also swamped the streets and college campuses of America. Who or what turned America's youth onto these illegal drugs? Celebrity anti-war activists like Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and Bertrand Russell sold America's youth on acid rock, tripping out, and one world government. Their financing came from the Warburg Banksters and IPS Institute for Policy Studies. Over 100 million doses of LSD that hit the streets of America were purchased by Timothy Leary and Alan Dulles through S.G. Warburg's Sandoz AB Pharmaceutical Company in Switzerland. Free sample-sized packages of acid were handed out not only on college campuses, but at rock concerts where musicians persuaded millions of fans to get by. Critics of the drug culture blamed parents, teachers, law enforcement, and everybody except the people behind it all, namely the Rothschild-Warburg banksters and their Committee of 300. According to Dr. John Coleman, who wrote the story of the Committee of 300, the Beatles rock group were brought to America by the Tavistock Institute. Tavistock launched the drug culture revolution in America to popularize and normalize social drug use. Through their record companies and advertising monopolies, the banksters had packaged and financed their celebrity salesmen to anesthetize, addict, and enslave billions of people worldwide with dependencies on both prescription and non-prescription, legal and illegal drugs. Those drugs range from alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine to Prozac, crack cocaine, and heroin. Like the phony war on terrorism, the phony war on drugs is a cat-and-mouse game being fought with one hand and fed with the other. The peace symbol adopted by the drug flower children of the 60s was designed by Gerald Holtham, who was commissioned by one world government salesman, Bertrand Russell. The symbol was never designed as a symbol of peace, but as a symbol of death. It is actually a cross turned upside down with the arms broken and is used by Satanists and in Druid witchcraft. In Germany, the symbol is known as the Death Rune and is found on tombstones of Hitler's Nazi SS officers. CIA's team of ex-Nazis and Skull and Bonesmen financed and trained Osama bin Laden, who pushed the Russians out of Afghanistan by 1989. The CIA then trained and installed the ruthless Taliban regime to run the booming opium trade. After a decade, the long friendship between America and the Taliban suddenly turned ugly. At a meeting held on December 4, 1997 at Unocal headquarters, American oilmen made a proposal to the Taliban about building a pipeline through Afghanistan. Rothschild Shell Oil and Rockefeller's Exxon Oil had invested billions in the Kazakhstan oil and gas reserves just north of Afghanistan. Now, they needed a pipeline to transport it to the Persian Gulf. The Taliban demanded a bigger cut and turned down the proposal. Suddenly, the banksters' American-controlled media were calling the Taliban monsters, evildoers, and cruel villains who beat up on women. On July 4, 1999, President Clinton froze the Taliban's U.S. assets and bank accounts and imposed trade sanctions on Afghanistan. By February 2001, the Taliban destroyed most of Afghanistan's opium crops. In May, Secretary of State Colin Powell announced a gift of $43 million to the Taliban. He called it a reward to the Taliban for destroying the opium crops, but members of the new George W. Bush White House knew the Taliban would use the $43 million for more sinister purposes. The larger issue is not just not connecting the dots, but not getting the dots. Why was it that CIA was unable to collect information for years inside Afghanistan when they had authority to kill bin Laden for over 2.5 years? Why were they unable to kill him or his lieutenants? Why didn't they have a better capability to do something about it at the source? Could it be that the bankster-supported U.S. administration is controlling both sides of the war on terror? George Bush Jr. attacked the poverty-stricken, war-ravaged country of Afghanistan only 4 weeks after 9/11. The U.S. and British military dropped 12,000 bombs on thousands of buildings and homes, pounding them into dust and rubble, and killing 8,000 Afghan people. 20,000 more people died from war-related cold, starvation, and disease. Nobody made a big-budget TV production out of the massacre with a God Bless Afghanistan movie score. The U.S.-British war on Afghanistan left behind millions of starving people and thousands of women who are still veiled, still homeless, and still penniless. Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium, and now the world's largest producer of heroin. There can never be peace and democracy in Afghanistan. Why? Because peace and democracy would expose and cut off corporate America's opium and heroin trade at the source. So what was the payoff for the U.S.-British war on Afghanistan? 1. The uncooperative Taliban warlords got kicked out and replaced by the cooperative Northern Alliance warlords. 2. Opium and heroin production and revenue skyrocketed. 3. Afghanistan got a new leader named Hamid Karzai, who just happens to be an ex-employee of Unocal Oil. 3. America got permission to build their oil and gas pipeline through Afghanistan. In the 1980s, the United States supported Iraq's invasion of its neighbor, Iran, to stop the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution. America played both sides of the Iran-Iraq war by supplying Saddam with chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. And at the same time, America secretly sold weapons to Iran and illegally diverted the money to the Contra-revolutionaries in Central America. During the war, the United States sent a special envoy to see Saddam in 1983. He was Donald Rumsfeld, now the U.S. Defense Secretary. The two men discussed how to reinforce Iraq against a common enemy. This was at a time when Iraq was using chemical weapons on Iranian troops. U.S. companies were supplying components with Washington's knowledge. By 1990, President George Bush Sr. tricked Iraq into another war with another oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. How? By supplying Kuwait with horizontal drills that could reach beneath the border of Iraq and siphon oil from Iraq's oil fields. Kuwait used the U.S.-made drills to steal 300,000 barrels of oil per day from Iraq, worth over $3 billion annually. The fuse was lit, and Kuwait did nothing to put it out. They pumped oil without restraint from Rumaila oil field, which was accessible to both Kuwait and Iraq, and they exceeded OPEC quotas, flooding the market and driving prices even lower. George Bush Sr. officially promised not to interfere in Iraq's legitimate oil battle with Kuwait, but when Saddam's army entered Kuwait to defend their oil reserves, Bush pounced on them. Power blow is not the conquest of Iraq, it is the liberation of Kuwait. America disposed of its toxic waste problem by building radioactive depleted uranium right into their bombs and dropping them on Iraq. Bush Sr. not only devastated and poisoned Iraq's water systems and infrastructure, he weakened the economies of both Kuwait and Iraq, collected giant profits from rationed Iraqi food for oil programs, and landed massive rebuilding contracts in Kuwait. Bush Sr. followed up the Gulf War with 10 long years of deadly trade sanctions that killed another 1.5 million Iraqi people, including 600,000 children who were cut off from medical supplies. A bookstore in the United States today, you can find 50 books celebrating different aspects of the war and how grand it all was, and you only find one that points out that this was a war crime, that demonstrates the evidence that shows that we deliberately targeted civilians and killed more than 250,000 people in Iraq. You'll be fighting not to conquer anybody, but to liberate people. In March 2003, President George Bush launched the Second Gulf War. They were about colonizing the Middle East and moving 2 giant steps closer to world domination. Private First Class Lindy England may never have figured these images would beam into the homes of millions of horrified people. Whatever she might have thought at the time, she says she and her comrades had no choice. I told her to stand there, give a thumbs up, smile, stand behind all of the naked Iraqis in the pyramid. Take a picture. Why were naked Muslim prisoners positioned on top of each other in the shape of an Egyptian pyramid? The answer can be found in the distant past. In ancient times, Iraq was called Babylon. The year is 586 BC. The armies of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, descend on Jerusalem with the wrath of an angry god. It is almost 6 centuries before the birth of Christ. The Solomons have not yet even dreamed of empire. It is a dark chapter in the history of the Jews, while Babylon's fierce star is rising. The Bible describes the Babylonian attack. Homes are pillaged. King Solomon's temple is set ablaze and utterly destroyed. Saddam Hussein made the mistake of comparing himself to Babylon's king, Nebuchadnezzar. The capture of Iraq and Saddam Hussein was not just about oil and colonization. It was also about settling an old Hebrew score. We got him. On December 13th, the producers of 911 released a new reality TV show called We Got Him. The Iraqi people claimed the We Got Him video show was staged. Why? Because the video shows ripe yellow-colored dates growing on a tree to the left of the hall, where Saddam Hussein was supposedly captured. Every Iraqi citizen knows that Iraqi dates only ripen and turn yellow in July and August, never in December. Since date trees don't tell lies, the We Got Him video had to be staged at least 3 months earlier in July or August, not on December 13th as reported. So, where is all this leading? What does this have to do with us? Well, these questions can only be answered by knowing what the Bible says about our future. You see, Bible prophecy is their roadmap, except they are trying to fool everyone into accepting the mark. This way, they can drag as many people as they can into hell with them. Destroying souls is their purpose. The plan is to create an apocalypse that will exhaust and depopulate the masses through deadly designer viruses, global terror, economic disasters, and nuclear war, when the remaining survivors will gladly embrace the promises of a handsome, charismatic new leader who will unveil his plan of hope for eternal world peace. The only way to achieve eternal world peace, he will explain, is to put an end to the 5 causes of war. Secretly, he knows there is only one main cause of wars, the wars caused by his royal ancestors who plan, provoke, financed and profited from them. He will sell his peace plan by telling the world that border wars will only end by creating a world without borders. Religious wars will only end by creating one world religion of interfaiths. Economic wars will only end by creating a cashless, debt-free society. Rivalry wars between rulers will only end by creating one world ruler. The tools used for war, from handguns to nuclear bombs, will be eliminated, and one world army will be created which will guarantee world peace. How will this eternal peace plan be accomplished? Through the United Nations, which is the brainchild of the Committee of 300 ruling families. The UN is their vehicle for world government and is located on 18 acres of prime Manhattan land, donated by the most visible of the ruling families, the Rockefellers. The UN is a closed organization with no public records or open meetings. US taxpayers have already invested $2 trillion in this world authority, although most of the people working for the UN are genuinely working for peace. The UN is a godless organization controlled by the Committee of 300. These inbred ruling families pretend to have royal blue blood, but their blood is no more blue or royal than Hannibal Lecter's blood. Some speculate that these families of evildoers are demons or aliens, or evil shape-shifting reptilians. But there is a more scientific explanation for their madness. For thousands of years, these families have practiced inbreeding between sisters and brothers, uncles and nieces, mothers and sons to keep the power and wealth all in the family. This practice of inbreeding over thousands of years has produced a clever but pathological breed of conscienceless, sociopathic families who will stop at nothing to own every ounce of gold, every drop of water, and every blade of grass on planet Earth. The United Nations, which they founded and control, has clearly stated its goals of establishing a new world order, a UN standing army, and a global taxation system. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, and Evelyn Rothschild have already established an interfaith declaration for the creation of one world religion. What would life be like in this world empire with one world religion, one world army, one world economy, one world court, one world media, one world government, and one world dictator? What the public doesn't know is that Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and the Russian Constitution have been built into the UN Charter, and that the New World Order will be a communist world order. Peace on Earth will be a forced peace in which citizens will have no rights, no right to bear children without approval, no right to travel without authorization, no right to own private property, no right to privacy, no right to bear arms, no right to protest, no right to receive an inheritance, no right to choose an education or a job or even a place of residence, and worst of all, no right to live. The right to live will be based on an individual's rating of usefulness to the royal elite. In this planned world without borders or nations, citizens will be disarmed of all weapons, including handguns, and will have no means to protest, fight, resist, or challenge this one world authority who will control them spiritually, economically, and militarily. Every human being will be electronically tattooed and will become helplessly dependent on this one world authority for all of their most basic needs. The masses will eventually be taught to bow down and worship this one world dictator who will rule the entire world from his eternal throne in Israel. This world leader will be the most popular man that will ever walk the planet Earth. He will be embraced by the whole world as the man of the hour. He's going to bring an apparent peace. He will rise as a finance man, a peacemaker, but emerges as the most powerful dictator that the world has ever seen. He will be a dynamic, mesmerizing public speaker. Apparently, this is the way he will literally sway the world, and it talks about him winning the hearts of the world, not just taking power over them, but he wins their hearts. He convinces them that he is the one who can bring world peace and prosperity and security. He's a convincer. He's able to persuade people like no one ever has before. The Bible also speaks of him as having supernatural power, doing signs and wonders. He's going to be a very convincing act. He's going to be the most attractive leader. There's a tendency because of our spiritual orientation to paint him in evil colors, and that is certainly valid, but it won't be apparent to the secular world. He is going to be the peacemaker. He's going to solve problems that no one has been able to solve to date, and as such will be embraced by the general population. He will be a media man's dream. He's not going to have to shoot his way into power, but people of the world, disillusioned with disorder and bankruptcy and all these individual and infectable problems and drive-by shootings and revolutions and the manageable state of world affairs. He will welcome a great world leader to man with a plan. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation will worship him, then not just follow him, but worship him. It speaks of him as being a miracle worker, a person who will appear to be a very good man. In fact, many characteristics of a Messiah will be found in him, but I believe that as Revelation 13 describes, he will be personally indwelt by Satan. He is energized by and upon of a final scheme by Satan himself. When Satan's attempt to counter it the real Messiah, in an attempt to thwart God's purpose. This frozen fire is portrayed in Revelation as a rider on a white horse, the first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. His control of the world becomes so complete that no one will be able to buy or sell anything without his mark of 666 in their right hand or on their forehead. Anyone taking his mark is doomed to spend eternity in the world. All who refuse to take his mark, or to the mark of the beast, will be hunted, died, and killed. We will force all people to take a mark, called the mark of the beast, without which no man will be able to buy or sell. This will probably be linked to a global, cashless economy, which will be introduced in the wake of some economic calamity. This is not out of the realm of possibility within the very next few years. A strong government, then, will be able to control every person on the base of the earth, because when we spend money, they'll know where we spend it. When we receive money, they'll know when we receive it. Every purchase we make is going to be recorded. Cash is gone. Everything is digital. You start to pay for the groceries. Your number comes up. The lady or the man says, "I'm sorry, but your number's been deactivated." Then you go back to what the Bible says, and he's given power of the money so that people cannot buy, they cannot sell without his mark, without his number, and so on. According to the Bible, these 7 years will be a time of tremendous deception. The world media will promote this global leader and his agenda. During this period, all religions will be considered equal and unite into one compromised worldwide spiritual organization. It's interesting that this coming world leader will apparently be successful at causing a universal one world religion. That sounds very appealing to the modern mind, but it is directly antithetical to the teachings of Jesus Christ. In order to bring the world together as one, it's going to have to be done with a religion. I think we have that religion just over the horizon. I think it's going to be an occultic religion. It's going to be a pagan religion. It's going to be a religion that will syncretize all of the other religions of the world. We can naturally presume that he somehow is going to bring together the New Age, Islam, Catholicism, the apostate Christian church, and so forth. There's going to be an integration politically and economically, but ecclesiastically or religiously. A second person, referred to as the false prophet, will rise to world power within this organization. This false religious leader will coax everyone into giving their allegiance to the Antichrist by performing great miracles. The true believer, those that are God's own, will avoid being deceived only by supernatural means. Jesus says, if it were possible, the very elect would be deceived. But personally, it's not possible. So the elect, that is those that are God's chosen, will be supernaturally protected from the widespread deception on the earth. This charming world leader's promises of global peace begin to unravel as the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse ride across the earth, representing war, famine, and disease, which brings death to 1/4 of the earth's population. Incredibly, the real horrors have yet to begin. Catastrophic earthquakes, destructive meteor showers, and unprecedented natural disasters follow. Although people know these judgments are occurring because of their rebellion against God, they refuse to repent and instead cling even tighter to their false leaders for help. Hail and fire rain down from the sky, causing 1/3 of the earth's vegetation to burn up, 1/3 of the sea creatures to die, and 1/3 of the ships of sea to be destroyed. 1/3 of the fresh water supply becomes poisoned, while the sun, moon, and stars are darkened to 1/3 of their light. In 90 AD, the prophet John saw these future events unfold in a vision from God. He obediently recorded them in a section of the Bible called Revelation. There he describes the visited creatures not of this earth that come to torment people. That torture is so bad that people beg to die. As if all this wasn't enough, an army of 200 million kills another 1/3 of the remaining population with fire. During this whole 7-year period of time, there will be earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tidal waves, natural disasters of every sort, which will produce great devastation throughout the earth. In addition to nuclear warfare and all the horrors that go along with it, there will be plagues, famines, diseases. The Bible says that more than half of the people who will be alive in the earth will die within that 7-year period of time. Man is now saying, I am autonomous. I am master of my own destiny. I can handle everything. By the way, he's going to get the chance. That's why the tribulation comes to pass, because God speaks to autonomous man and says, you have bragged about how you can run the world. Here's your chance. And he runs the world into the ground, Except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. During the first half of the tribulation, 2 miracle-working prophets of God, based in Jerusalem, tell the world's population why God is judging them. They also proclaim God's free gift of salvation, available through belief in God's Son, Jesus Christ. Exactly 3.5 years into the 7-year period, the world leader kills these 2 prophets and enters the rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. There, he demands the entire world worship him as God. Those carrying the 666th mark become infected with awful sores. All sea life dies, and the remaining fresh water becomes polluted. People chew their tongues in pain and curse God, refusing to turn from their evil deeds of murdering, stealing, witchcraft, and sex outside of marriage. The worst earthquake in history strikes, literally leveling cities of the world. Real stones weigh more than 50 pounds each rain down from the sky, crushing everything with their devastating impact. Finally, the armies of the world gather together in the Jezreel Valley to instigate the infamous and deadly Battle of Armageddon. This all-out confrontation almost annihilates mankind, but is stopped when Jesus Christ returns to planet Earth in the clouds. So I guess that's it. Like I said, I don't want to scare you guys, I just want you guys to know what time we're in and what to expect next. The recording you're about to hear is from 1967, and it perfectly describes the world we live in today. Recorded by Myron C. Fagan, an American filmmaker who claimed to have seen secret documents that not only prove the existence of the Illuminati, but also link them to major events that occurred worldwide. These seemingly random events were not random at all. They were carried out by a secret group of individuals who have been orchestrating these events since the beginning of time.
This satanic plot was launched back in the 1760s when it first came into existence under the name of the Illuminati. This Illuminati was organized by one Adam Weishaupt, born a Jew, who was converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic priest, and then, at the behest of the then newly organized House of Rothschild, defected and organized the Illuminati. Naturally, the Rothschilds financed that operation. And every war since then, beginning with the French Revolution, has been promoted by the Illuminati, operating under various names and guises. I say under various names and guises because after the Illuminati was exposed and became too notorious, Weishaupt and his co-conspirators began to operate under various other names. In the United States, immediately after World War I, they set up what they called the Council on Foreign Relations, commonly referred to as the CFR. And this CFR is actually the Illuminati in the United States. And its hierarchy, the masterminds in control of the CFR, to a very great extent, are the descendants of the original Illuminati conspirators. But to conceal that fact, most of them changed their original family names to American-sounding names. For example, the true name of the Dillons, Clarence and Douglas Dillon, once Secretary of the U.S. Treasury Department, is Lepowski. I'll come back to all this later. There is a similar establishment of the Illuminati in England, operating under the name of the British Institute of International Affairs. There are similar secret Illuminati organizations in France, Germany, and other nations operating under different names. And all these organizations, including the CFR, continuously set up numerous subsidiary or front organizations. that are infiltrated into every phase of the various nations' affairs. But at all times, the operations of these organizations were and are masterminded and controlled by the internationalist bankers, who in turn were and are controlled by the Rothschilds. One branch of the Rothschild family had financed Napoleon. Another branch of the Rothschilds, both branches the real masterminds of the Illuminati, financed Britain, Germany, and the other nations in the Napoleonic Wars. Immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, the Illuminati assumed that all the nations were so destitute and so weary of wars that they'd be glad for any solution. So the Rothschild stooges set up what they called the Congress in Vienna, and at that meeting they tried to create the first League of Nations, their first attempted one world government, on the theory that all the crowned heads of the European governments were so deeply in debt to them that they would willingly or unwillingly serve as their stooges. But the Tsar of Russia caught the stench of the plot and completely torpedoed it. The enraged Nathan Rothschild, then the head of that dynasty, vowed that someday he or his descendants would destroy the Tsar and his entire family. And his descendants did accomplish that very threat in 1917. At this point, bear in mind that the Illuminati was not set up to operate on a short-range basis. Normally, a conspirator of any type enters into a conspiracy with the expectation of achieving his objective during his own lifetime. But that was not the case with the Illuminati. True, they hoped to accomplish their objective during their lifetime. But, paraphrasing The Show Must Go On, the Illuminati operates on the very long-range basis. Whether it will take scores of years or even centuries, they have dedicated their descendants to keep the plot boiling until they hope the conspiracy is achieved. Now let's go back to the birth of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, teaching in Ingolstadt University when he defected from Christianity to embrace the Luciferian conspiracy. It was in 1770 that the professional moneylenders, the then recently organized House of Rothschild, retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols of Zionism, which from the outset was designed to give the synagogue of Satan, so named by Jesus Christ, ultimate world domination, so they could impose the Luciferian ideology upon what would remain of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weishaupt completed his task May 1st, 1776. Now you know why May 1 is the great day with all communist nations to this very day. That was the day, May 1, 1776, that Weishaupt completed his plan and officially organized the Illuminati to put the plan into execution. That plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. That objective was to be reached by dividing the masses of people whom he, Weishaupt, termed Goyim, or human cattle, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, social, economic, and other issues, the very conditions we have in our country today. The opposing sides were then to be armed and incidents provided which would cause them to fight and weaken themselves and gradually destroy national governments and religious institutions. Again, I say, the very conditions in the world today. Now, just why did the conspirators choose the word Illuminati for their satanic organization? Weishaupt himself said that the word is derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light, using the lie that his objective was to bring about a one-world government to enable those with mental ability to govern the world and prevent all wars in the future. In short, using the word peace on earth as his bait, exactly as that same bait, peace, was used by the 1945 conspirators to foist the United Nations on us. Weishaupt, financed, I repeat, by the Rothschilds, recruited some 2,000 paid followers. These included the most intelligent men in the fields of arts and letters, education, the sciences, finance, and industry. He then established lodges of the Grand Orient, Masonic lodges, to be their secret headquarters. And I again repeat that in all of this, he was acting under orders from the House of Rothschild. The main features of the Weishaupt plan of operation required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them to accomplish their purpose. Number one, use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of men already in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of endeavor. Once influential persons had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail, threats of financial ruin, public exposure and physical harm, even death, to themselves and loved members of their families. Do you realize how many present top officials in our federal government in Washington are controlled in just that way by the CFR? Number two, Illuminati on the faculties of colleges and universities were to cultivate students possessing exceptional mental ability belonging to well-bred families with international leanings, and recommend them for special training in internationalism. Such training was to be provided by granting scholarships to those selected by the Illuminists. That gives you an idea what a Rhodes Scholarship means. It means indoctrination into accepting the idea that only a one-world government can put an end to recurring wars and strife. That's how the United Nations was sold to the American people. All such scholars were to be first persuaded and then convinced that men of special talent and brains have the right to rule those less gifted on the ground that the masses don't know what is best for them physically, mentally, and spiritually. Number three, all influential people trapped into coming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the students who had been specially educated and trained, were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists, so they would advise the top executives to adopt policies which would, in the long run, serve the secret plans of the Illuminati one-world conspiracy and bring about the destruction of the governments and religions they were elected or appointed to serve. Number four, perhaps the most vital directive in Weishaupt's plan was to obtain absolute control of the press, at that time the only mass communications media, to distribute information to the public, so that all news and information could be slanted, so that the masses could be convinced that a one-world government is the only solution to our many and varied problems. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communications media? I'll tell you, practically all the movie lots in Hollywood is owned by the Lehmans, Kuhn Loeb and Company, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist bankers. All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled by those same internationalist bankers. The same is true of every chain of metropolitan newspapers and magazines, also of the press wire services, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed heads of all those media are merely the fronts for the internationalist bankers who in turn compose the hierarchy of the CFR, today's Illuminati in America. Now can you understand why the Pentagon's press agent Sylvester so brazenly proclaimed that the government has the right to lie to the people? What he really meant was that our CFR-controlled government had the power to lie to and be believed by the brainwashed American people. And let's again go back to the first days of the Illuminati. Because Britain and France were the two greatest world powers in the late years of the 18th century, Weishaupt ordered the Illuminati to foment the colonial wars, including our Revolutionary War, to weaken the British Empire and organize the French Revolution to destroy the French Empire. He scheduled the French Revolution to start in 1789. However, in 1784, a true act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the Illuminati, and that evidence could have saved France if they, the French government, hadn't refused to believe it. Here is how that act of God happened. It was in 1874 that Weishaupt issued his orders for the French Revolution. A German writer named Zwack put it into book form. It contained the entire Illuminati story and Weishaupt's plans. A copy of this book was sent to the Illuminists in France, headed by Robespierre, whom Weishaupt had delegated to foment the French Revolution. The courier was struck and killed by lightning as he rode through Ralston on his way from Frankfurt to Paris. The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned them over to the proper authorities. After careful study of the plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raid Weishaupt's newly organized lodges of the Grand Orient and the homes of his most influential associates. All additional evidence thus discovered convinced the authorities the documents were genuine copies of the conspiracy by which the Illuminati planned to use wars and revolutions to bring about the establishment of a one-world government, the powers of which they, headed by the Rothschilds, intended to usurp as soon as it was established, exactly in line with the United Nations plot of today. In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lodges of the Grand Orient. In 1786, they published all the details of the conspiracy. The English title of that publication is The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Copies of the entire conspiracy were sent to all the heads of church and state in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, Illuminati became a dirty word, and it went underground. At the same time, Weishaupt ordered Illuminists to infiltrate into the lodges of Blue Masonry and form their own secret societies within all secret societies. Only Masons who proved themselves internationalists and those whose conduct proved they had defected from God were initiated into the Illuminati. Thenceforth, the conspirators donned the cloak of philanthropy and humanitarianism to conceal their revolutionary and subversive activities. In order to infiltrate into Masonic lodges in Britain, Weishaupt invited John Robison over to Europe. Robison was a high-degree Mason in the Scottish Rite. He was a professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh University and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Robison did not fall for the lie that the objective of the Illuminati was to create a benevolent dictatorship, but he kept his reactions to himself so well that he was entrusted with a copy of Weishaupt's revised conspiracy for study and safekeeping. Anyway, because the heads of state and church in France were deluded into ignoring the warnings given them, the revolution broke out in 1789 as scheduled by Weishaupt. In order to alert other governments to their danger, in 1798 Robeson published a book entitled Proof of a Conspiracy to Destroy All Governments and Religions. But his warnings were ignored, exactly as our American people have been ignoring all warnings about the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. Now here is something that will stun and very likely outrage many who hear this, but there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of Weishaupt's. Jefferson was one of Weishaupt's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robeson warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati had infiltrated into their lodges. And on July 19, 1789, David Papin, president of Harvard University, issued the same warning to the graduating class and lectured them on the influence Illuminism was acquiring on American politics and religion. And to top it off, John Quincy Adams, who had organized the New England Masonic lodges, issued his warnings. He wrote 3 letters to Colonel William L. Stone, a top Mason, in which he exposed how Jefferson was using Masonic lodges for subversive, Illuministic purposes. Those 3 letters are at this very time in Rittenberg Square Library in Philadelphia. In 1826, one Captain William Morgan decided it was his duty to inform all Masons and the general public what the full truth was regarding the Illuminati, their secret plans and intended objectives. Also reveal the identities of the masterminds of the conspiracy. The Illuminati promptly tried Morgan in absentia and convicted him of treason. They ordered one Richard Howard, an English Illuminist, to carry out their sentence of execution as a traitor. Morgan was warned and he tried to escape to Canada, but Howard caught up with him near the border, near the Niagara Gorge to be exact, where he murdered him. This was verified in a sworn statement made in New York by one Avery Allen to the effect that he heard Howard render his report of the execution to a meeting of Knights Templars in St. John's Hall, New York. He also told how arrangements had been made to ship Howard back to England. That Allen affidavit is on record in New York City archives. Very few Masons and very few of the general public know that general disapproval over that incident of murder caused approximately half of all the Masons in the northern jurisdiction of the United States to secede. Copies of the minutes of the meeting held to discuss that matter are still in existence in safe hands, and that all that secrecy emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati to prevent such terrible events of history from being taught in our schools. The Rothschilds decided that to keep the plot alive, they'd have to do it by heightening their control of the money systems of the European nations. Earlier, by a ruse, the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo had been falsified. Rothschild had spread a story that Napoleon had won that battle. That had precipitated a terrific panic on the stock market in England. All stocks had plummeted down to practically zero, and Nathan Rothschild bought all the stocks for virtually a penny on its dollar values. That gave him complete control of the economy of Britain and virtually of all Europe. So immediately after that Congress in Vienna had boomeranged, Rothschild forced Britain to set up a new Bank of England, which he absolutely controlled. Exactly as later, through Jacob Schiff, he engineered our own Federal Reserve Act, which gave the House of Rothschild a secret control of the economy in the United States. Weishaupt died in 1830, but prior to his death, he prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which, under various aliases, was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations and groups by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rusk, McNamara, Fulbright, etc. as prime examples. In addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Karl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy could use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other, and particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. The work Ritter started was continued after his death and completed by the German so-called philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, who founded Nietzscheism. This Nietzscheism was later developed into fascism and then into Nazism, and was used to foment World Wars I and II. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, he, Pike, worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 Supreme Councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the 3rd in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince at Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political Zionists. And here let it be noted that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, and other internationalist bankers, and that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish internationalist bankers at all. That slaughter was necessary in order to create worldwide hatred of the German people and thus bring about the war against them. In short, this Second World War was to be fought to destroy Nazism and to increase the power of political Zionism so that the State of Israel could be established in Palestine. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies the agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to Mazzini on August 15, 1871. Pike stated, "Those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known." Quoting his own words, taken from the letter he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter is now catalogued in the British Museum in London, England, he said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time." When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy, but actually they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy. The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayer Anschelm, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschild's boy in America, died, the headquarters of the American branch has been in the Harold Pratt Building, New York, and the Rockefellers, originally protégés of Schiff, have taken over the manipulation of finances in America for the Illuminati. In the final phases of the conspiracy, the one world government will consist of the king dictator, head of the United Nations, the CFR, and a few billionaires, economists, and scientists who have proved their devotion to the great conspiracy. All others are to be integrated into a vast conglomeration of mongrelized humanity, actually slaves. Now let me show you how our federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one world takeover plot of the Illuminati great conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one world so-called liberal conspiracy. The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that Weishaupt and the earlier masterminds had ever overlooked the New World. As I have previously indicated, Weishaupt had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than a match for them. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched their first concrete efforts. We know that Judah Benjamin, chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, was a Rothschild agent. We also know that there were Rothschild agents planted in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet who tried to sell him into a financial dealing with the House of Rothschild. But old Abe saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it, thereby incurring the undying enmity of the Rothschilds, exactly as the Russian Tsar did when he torpedoed their first League of Nations at the Congress in Vienna. Investigation of the assassination of Lincoln revealed that the assassin, Booth, was a member of a secret conspiratorial group. Because there were a number of highly important government officials involved, the name of the group was never revealed, and it became a mystery, exactly as the assassination of Jack Kennedy still is a mystery. The ending of the Civil War destroyed, temporarily, all chances of the House of Rothschild to get a clutch on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch, but they lost no time in getting started. Shortly after the Civil War, a young immigrant who called himself Jacob H. Schiff arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money wizard, but more important, he also saw the latent Machiavellian qualities in Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschilds' London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Actually, Jacob came here to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1, and most important, was to acquire control of America's money system. Number 2, find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, in the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. Number 3, create minority group strife throughout the nations, particularly between whites and blacks. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, but Christianity to be the chief target. Now, the vast majority of the American people think that the Federal Reserve System is a United States government-owned agency. That is positively false. All of the stock of the Federal Reserve banks is owned by the member banks, and the heads of the member banks are all members of the hierarchy of the great Illuminati conspiracy known today as the CFR. The details of that act of treason in which many traitorous so-called Americans participated are far too long for this recording. Now, if you think that those aliens and their by accident of birth American co-conspirators would be content with just the control of our money system, you're in for another very sad shock. The Federal Reserve System gave the conspirators complete control of our money system, but it in no way touched the earnings of the people, because the Constitution positively forbids what is now known as the 20% withholding tax. But the Illuminati blueprint for one-world enslavement called for the confiscation of all private property and control of individual earning powers. This, and Karl Marx stressed that feature in his blueprint, had to be accomplished by a progressive graduated income tax. As I stated, such a tax could not lawfully be imposed upon the American people. It is succinctly and expressly forbidden by our Constitution. Thus, only an amendment to the Constitution could give the federal government such confiscatory powers. Well, that too was not an insurmountable problem for our Machiavellian plotters. The same elected leaders in both houses of Congress and the same Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the infamous Federal Reserve Act into law, amended the Constitution to make the federal income tax, known as the 16th Amendment, a law of the land. Both are illegal under our Constitution. In short, the same traitors signed both betrayals, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment, into law. However, it seems that nobody ever realized that the 16th Amendment was set up to rob, and I do mean rob, the people of their earnings via the income tax provision. The plotters didn't fully use that provision until World War II, when that great humanitarian, Franklin Roosevelt, applied a 20% withholding tax on all small wage earners and up to 90% on higher incomes. Oh, of course, he faithfully promised that it would be only for the duration of the war. But what was a promise to such a charlatan who in 1940, when he was running for his third term, kept proclaiming, "I say again and again and again that I will never send American boys to fight on foreign soil"? Remember? He was proclaiming that even as he was already preparing to plunge us into World War II by enticing the Japanese into that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor to furnish him with his excuse. And before I forget, let me remind you that another charlatan named Woodrow Wilson used exactly that same campaign slogan in 1916. His slogan was, "Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war." Exactly the same formula, exactly the same promises. But wait, as Al Jolson used to say, you ain't heard nothing yet. That 16th Amendment income tax trap was intended to confiscate, rob, the earnings only of the common herd, you and me. It was not intended to even touch the huge incomes of the Illuminati gang, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Lehmans, and all the other conspirators. So together with that 16th Amendment, they created what they called the tax-free foundations. That would enable the conspirators to transform their huge wealth into such so-called foundations and avoid payment of virtually all income taxes. The excuse for it was that the earnings of those tax-free foundations would be devoted to humanitarian philanthropy. So we now have the several Rockefeller foundations, the Carnegie Endowment Fund, the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and hundreds of similar tax-free foundations. And what kind of philanthropy do these foundations support? Well, they finance all the civil rights groups that are creating all the chaos and rioting all over the country. In short, the tax-free foundation finance those who are doing the job for the Illuminati Great Conspiracy. Our CFR Illuminati-controlled federal government can grant tax-free status to all foundations and pro-red one-world outfits, such as the Fund for the Republic. But if you, or a patriotic pro-organization, is too outspokenly pro-American, they can terrify and intimidate you by finding a misplaced comma in your income tax report and by threatening you with penalties, fines, and even prison. Future historians will wonder how the American people could have been so naive and stupid as to have permitted such audaciously brazen acts of treason as the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment. Well, they were not naive and they were not stupid. The answer is they trusted the men they elected to safeguard our country and our people, and they just didn't have even an inkling about either betrayal until after each one had been accomplished. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass communications media that kept and is keeping our people naive and stupid and unaware of the treason being committed. Now the great question is, when will the people wake up and do to our traitors of today what George Washington and our founding fathers would have done to Benedict Arnold? Actually, Benedict Arnold was a petty traitor compared to our present traitors in Washington. Now let's go back to the events that followed the rape of our Constitution by the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of the 16th Amendment. With Wilson completely under their control, the masterminds of the Great Conspiracy put in motion their next and what they hoped would be their final steps to achieve their one-world government. The first of those steps was to be World War I. Why war? Simple. The only excuse for a one-world government is that it will supposedly ensure peace. The only thing that can make people cry for peace is war. War brings chaos, destruction, exhaustion, to winner as well as to loser. It brings economic ruin to both. Most important, it destroys the flower of the young manhood of both. To the saddened and heartbroken oldsters, the mothers and fathers, who are left with nothing but memories of their beloved sons, peace becomes worth any price. And that is the emotion upon which the conspirators depend for the success of their satanic plot. Throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1914, the world as a whole was at peace. Such wars as the Franco-Prussian, our own Civil War, the Russo-Japanese War, were what might be termed local disturbances that did not affect the rest of the world. All the great nations were prosperous, the peoples staunchly nationalistic and fiercely proud of their sovereignties. It was utterly unthinkable that the French and the German peoples would be willing to live under a one-world government, or the Turks and the Russians, or the Chinese and the Japanese. Even more unthinkable that a Kaiser Wilhelm, or a Franz Joseph, or a Tsar Nicholas, or any monarch would willingly and meekly surrender his throne to a one-world government. But bear in mind that the peoples in all nations are the real power, and only one thing, war, could make the peoples yearn and clamor for a peace-ensuring one-world government. But it would have to be a frightful and horribly devastating war. It could not be just a local disturbing war between just two nations. It would have to be a world war. No major nation must be left untouched by the horrors and devastation of such a war. The cry for peace must be made universal. Actually, that was the format set by the Illuminati and Nathan Rothschild at the turn of the 19th century. They first maneuvered all of Europe into the Napoleonic Wars. Then the Congress in Vienna, which they, and particularly Rothschild, planned to transform into a League of Nations, which was to have been the housing for their one-world government, exactly as the present United Nations was set up to be the housing for the forthcoming, God forbid, one-world government. Anyway, that was the format the House of Rothschild and Jacob Schiff decided to employ to achieve their objective in 1914. Of course, they knew that that same format had failed in 1814, but they theorized that was only because the Tsar of Russia had torpedoed that scheme. Well, the present 1914 conspirators would eliminate that 1814 fly in the ointment. They'd make sure that after the New World War, they were conspiring there'd be no Tsar of Russia around to throw monkey wrenches into the machinery. History records that World War I was precipitated by a trivial incident, the kind of incident both Weishaupt and Albert Pike had incorporated in their blueprints. That incident was the assassination of an Austrian archduke, arranged by the Illuminati masterminds. The war followed. It involved Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies, so-called the Axis powers, against France, Britain, and Russia, called the Allies. Only the United States was not involved during the first 2 years. By 1917, the conspirators had achieved their primary objective. All of Europe was in a state of destitution. All the peoples were war-weary and crying for peace. And the outcome, too, was all set. It was to come as soon as the United States would be hurled in on the side of the Allies. And that was all set to happen immediately after Wilson's re-election. After that, there could be only one outcome: complete victory for the Allies. When Wilson was campaigning for re-election in 1916, his chief appeal was, "Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war." But during that same campaign, the Republican Party publicly charged that Wilson had long committed himself to throw us into the war. They charged that if he would be defeated, he would accomplish that act during his few remaining months in office. But if re-elected, he would hold off until after re-election. But at that time, the American people looked upon Wilson as a God-man. Well, Wilson was re-elected. And as per the schedule of the conspirators, he hurled us into the war in 1917. He used the sinking of the Lusitania as an excuse, a sinking which also was prearranged. Roosevelt, also a God-man in the eyes of the American people, followed the same technique in 1941 when he used the prearranged Pearl Harbor attack as his excuse for hurling us into World War II. Now, exactly as the conspirators planned, victory for the Allies would eliminate all the monarchs of the defeated nations and leave all their peoples leaderless, confused, bewildered, and perfectly conditioned for the one-world government the great conspiracy intended would follow. But there still would be an obstacle, the same obstacle that had balked the Illuminati and Rothschild at that Congress in Vienna peace gathering after the Napoleonic Wars. Russia would be on the winning side this time, as it was in 1814. Therefore, the Tsar would be securely on his throne. Here it is pertinent to note that Russia, under the Tsarist regime, had been the one country in which the Illuminati had never made any headway, nor had the Rothschilds ever been able to infiltrate their banking interests. Thus, a winning Tsar would be more difficult than ever to cope with. Even if he could be enticed into a so-called League of Nations, it was a foregone conclusion that he would never, but never go for a one-world government. So even before the outbreak of World War I, the conspirators had a plan in the making to carry out Nathan Rothschild's vow of 1814 to destroy the Tsar and also murder all possible royal heirs to the throne. And it would have to be done before the close of the war, and the Russian Bolsheviki were to be their instruments in this particular plot. From the turn of the century, the chiefs of the Bolsheviki were Nikolai Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and later Joseph Stalin. Of course, those were not their true family names. Prior to the outbreak of the war, Lenin headquartered in Paris. After the outbreak, Switzerland became his haven. Trotsky's headquarters were on the Lower East Side in New York, largely the habitat of Russian Jewish refugees. Both Lenin and Trotsky were similarly bewhiskered and unkempt. In those days, that was the badge of Bolshevism. Both lived well, yet neither had a regular occupation. Neither had any visible means of support, yet both always had plenty of money. All those mysteries were solved in 1917. Right from the outset of the war, strange and mysterious goings-on were taking place in New York. Night after night, Trotsky darted furtively in and out of Jacob Schiff's palatial mansion. And in the dead of those same nights, there were gatherings of hoodlums of New York's Lower East Side, all of them Russian refugees, at Trotsky's headquarters, and all were going through some mysterious sort of training process. But it was all shrouded in mystery. Nobody talked, although it did leak out that Schiff was financing all of Trotsky's activities. Then suddenly Trotsky vanished. So did approximately 300 of his trained hoodlums. Actually, they were on the high seas in a Schiff-chartered ship bound for a rendezvous with Lenin and his gang in Switzerland. And on that ship was $20 million in gold, the $20 million Schiff provided to finance the Bolsheviki takeover of Russia. In anticipation of Trotsky's arrival, Lenin prepared to throw a party in his Switzerland hideaway. Men of the very highest places in the world were to be guests at that party. Among them were the mysterious Colonel Edward Mandel House, Woodrow Wilson's mentor and palsy-walsy, and more important, Schiff's special and confidential messenger. Another of the expectant guests was Warburg of the Warburg banking clan in Germany, who were financing the Kaiser, and whom the Kaiser had rewarded by making him chief of the secret police of Germany. In addition, there were the Rothschilds of London and Paris, also Litvinov, Kaganovich, Stalin, who was then head of a train and bank-robbing gang of bandits. He was known as the Jesse James of the Urals. And here I must remind that England and France were then long in war with Germany, and that on February 3, 1917, Wilson had broken off all diplomatic relations with Germany. Therefore, Warburg, Colonel House, the Rothschild, and all those others were enemies. But of course, Switzerland was neutral ground where enemies could meet and be friends, especially if they had some scheme in common. That Lenin party was very nearly wrecked by an unforeseen incident. The Schiff-chartered ship on its way to Switzerland was intercepted and taken into custody by a British warship. But Schiff quickly rushed orders to Wilson to order the British to release the ship intact with the Trotsky hoodlums and the gold. Wilson obeyed. He warned the British that if they refused to release the ship, the United States would not enter the war in April as he had faithfully promised a year earlier. The British heeded the warning, Trotsky arrived in Switzerland, and the Lenin Party went off as scheduled. But they still faced what ordinarily would have been the insurmountable obstacle of getting the Lenin-Trotsky band of terrorists across the border into Russia. Well, that's where Brother Warburg, chief of the German secret police, came in. He loaded all those thugs into sealed freight cars and made all the necessary arrangement for their secret entry into Russia. The rest is history. The revolution in Russia took place, and all members of the royal Romanov family were murdered. Now, my chief objective is to establish beyond even a remote doubt that communism, so-called, is an integral part of the Illuminati's great conspiracy for the enslavement of the entire world. That communism, so-called, is merely their weapon and bogeyman word to terrify the peoples of the whole world, and that the conquest of Russia and the creation of communism was in great part organized by Schiff and the other international bankers right in our own city of New York. Charlie Knickerbocker, a Hearst newspaper columnist, published an interview with John Schiff, grandson of Jacob, in which young Schiff confirmed the entire story and named the figure old Jacob contributed, $20 million. If anybody still has even a remote doubt that the entire menace of communism was created by the masterminds of the great conspiracy right in our own city of New York, I will cite the following historical fact. All records show that when Lenin and Trotsky engineered the capture of Russia, they operated as heads of the Bolsheviki Party. Now, Bolshevism is a purely Russian word. The masterminds realized that Bolshevism could never be sold as an ideology to any but the Russian people. So in April 1918, Jacob Schiff dispatched Colonel House to Moscow with orders to Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin to change the name of their regime to the Communist Party and to adopt the Karl Marx Manifesto as the constitution of the Communist Party. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin obeyed. And that year of 1918 was when the Communist Party and the menace of communism came into being. All this is confirmed in Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 5th edition. In short, communism was created by the capitalists. Thus, until November 11, 1918, the entire fiendish plan of the conspirators worked perfectly. All the great nations, including the United States, were war-weary, devastated, mourning their dead. Peace was the great universal desire. Thus, when it was proposed by Wilson to set up a League of Nations to ensure peace, all the great nations, with no Russian czar to stand in their way, jumped on that bandwagon without even stopping to read the fine print in that insurance policy. That is all but one, the United States, the very one that Schiff and his co-conspirators least expected would balk. And that was their one fatal mistake in that early plot. You see, when Schiff planted Woodrow Wilson in the White House, the conspirators assumed that they had the United States in the proverbial bag. Wilson had been perfectly built up as a great humanitarian. He supposedly became established as a God-man with the American people. There was every reason for the conspirators to have believed that he would easily hornswoggle Congress into buying the League of Nations sight unseen, exactly as the Congress of 1945 bought the United Nations sight unseen. But there was one man in the Senate in 1918 who saw through that scheme just as the Russian Tsar did in 1814. He was a man of great political stature, almost as great as that of Teddy Roosevelt, and fully as astute. He was highly respected and trusted by all members of both houses of Congress and by the American people. The name of that great and patriotic American was Henry Cabot Lodge, not the phony of today who called himself Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. until he was exposed. Lodge completely unmasked Wilson and kept the United States out of the League of Nations. Here it becomes of great interest to know the real reason for the Wilson League of Nations flop. As I previously stated, Schiff was sent to the United States to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1 and most important was to acquire complete control of the U.S. money system. Number 2, as outlined in the original Weishaupt Illuminati blueprint, he was to find the right kind of men to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into the highest offices in our federal government, our Congress, our U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies, such as the State Department, the Pentagon, the Treasury Department, etc. Number 3, destroy the unity of the American people by creating minority group strife throughout the nation, especially between the whites and blacks as outlined in Israel Cohen's book. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, with Christianity to be the chief target or victim. In addition, he was strongly reminded of the imperative directive in the Illuminati blueprint to achieve full control of all mass communications media, to be used to brainwash the people into believing and accepting all of the maneuverings of the great conspiracy. Schiff was warned that only control of the press, at that time our only mass communications media, would enable him to destroy the unity of the American people. Now then, Schiff and his co-conspirators did set up the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, in 1909. And in 1913, he set up the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith. Both were to create the necessary strife. But in the early years, the ADL operated very timidly, perhaps for fear of a pogrom-like action by an aroused and enraged American people. In addition, he, Schiff, was busy developing and infiltrating the stooges to serve in all high places in our Washington government, and in the job of acquiring control of our money system and the creation of the 16th Amendment. He also was very busy with the organizing of the plot for the takeover of Russia. In short, he was kept so busy with all those jobs that he completely overlooked the supreme job of acquiring complete control of our mass communications media. That oversight was the direct cause for Wilson's failure to lure the United States into the League of Nations, because when Wilson decided to go to the people to overcome the opposition of the Lodge-controlled Senate, despite his established but phony reputation as a great humanitarian, he found himself faced by a solidly united people and by a loyal press whose only ideology was Americanism and the American way of life. At that time, due to the ineptness and ineffectiveness of both the ADL and the NAACP, there were no organized minority groups, no Negro problems, no so-called anti-Semitic problem to sway the people's thinking. There were no lefts, there were no rights, no prejudices for crafty exploitations. Thus, Wilson's League of Nations appeals fell on deaf ears. The control of the press was assigned to Rockefeller. Thus, Henry Luce, who recently died, was financed to set up a number of national magazines, among them Life, Time, Fortune, and others, which publish USSR in America. The Rockefellers also directly or indirectly financed the Cowles Brothers Look magazine and a chain of newspapers. They also financed a man named Sam Newhouse to buy up and build a chain of newspapers all over the country. And the late Eugene Meyer, one of the founders of CFR, bought the Washington Post, Newsweek, the weekly magazine, and other publications. At the same time, CFR began to develop and nurture a new breed of scurrilous columnists and editorial writers, such as Walter Lippmann, Drew Pearson, the Alsops, Herbert Matthews, Irwin Canham, and others of that ilk, who called themselves liberals, who proclaimed that Americanism is isolationism, that isolationism is warmongerism, that anti-communism is anti-Semitism and racism. All that took time, of course, But today our entire press, except for some local small-town papers and weeklies published by patriotic organizations, is completely controlled by CFR stooges, and thus they finally succeeded in breaking us up into a nation of quarreling, wrangling, squabbling, hating factions. Now, if you still wonder about the slanted news and outright lies you read in your paper, you have the answer. To the Lehmans, Goldman Sachs, Kuhn Loeb, and the Warburgs, the CFR assigned the job of getting control of the motion picture industry, Hollywood, radio and television, and believe you me, they succeeded. If you still wonder about the strange propaganda broadcasts by the Ed Murrows, Chet Huntley, Howard K. Smith, Eric Severide, Drew Pearson, and others of that ilk, you have the answer. If you wonder about all the smut, sex, pornography, and mixed marriage films you see in your movie theater and on your TV set, all of which is demoralizing our youth, you have the answer. It tells in detail how the press, the movies, TV, and radio have been, and still are, used to brainwash the people, to demoralize our youth, and they have been and still are encouraging and creating sympathy for the rioting civil rights lawlessness. To the vast majority of the American people, our foreign policy for many years has been a complete enigma. Most of us simply can't understand why this great nation is seemingly floundering so helplessly in the art of diplomacy. We can't understand why our leaders are seemingly so confused and bewildered in all their dealings. Now I have one more vital message to deliver. As I told you, one of the 4 specific assignments Rothschild gave Jacob Schiff was to create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, with Christianity to be the chief target. For a very obvious reason, the Anti-Defamation League wouldn't dare to attempt it, because such an attempt could create the most terrible bloodbath in the history of the world, not only for the ADL and the conspirators, but for the millions of innocent Jews. Schiff turned that job over to Rockefeller for another specific reason. The destruction of Christianity could be accomplished only by those who are entrusted to preserve it, by the pastors, the men of the cloth. As a starter, John D. Rockefeller picked up a young so-called Christian minister by the name of Dr. Harry F. Ward, Reverend Ward, if you please. At that time, he was teaching religion at the Union Theological Seminary. Rockefeller found a very willing Judas in this reverend. Thereupon, in 1907, he financed him to set up the Methodist Foundation of Social Service. And Ward's job was to teach bright young men to become so-called ministers of Christ and to place them as pastors of churches. While teaching them to become ministers, the Reverend Ward also taught them how to very subtly and craftily preach to their congregations that the entire story of Christ is a myth, to cast doubts on the divinity of Christ, to cast doubts about the Virgin Mary. In short, to cast doubts on Christianity as a whole. It was not to be a direct attack, but much of it by crafty insinuation that was to be applied in particular to the youth in the Sunday schools. Remember Lenin's statement? Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world. Then, in 1908, the Methodist Foundation of Social Service, which incidentally was America's first Communist Front organization, changed its name to the Federal Council of Churches. By 1950, the Federal Council of Churches was becoming very suspect. So in 1950, they changed the name to the National Council of Churches. Do I have to tell you more about how this National Council of Churches is deliberately destroying faith in Christianity? I don't think so. But this I will tell you. If you are a member of any congregation, whose pastor and church are members of this Judas organization, your contributions are helping the Illuminati's plot to destroy religion and your faith in God and Jesus Christ. Thus you are deliberately delivering your children to be indoctrinated with disbelief in God and church, and which can easily transform them into atheists. Find out immediately if your church is a member of the National Council of Churches, and for the love of God and your children, if it is, withdraw from it at once. However, let me warn you, that same destroy religion process has been infiltrated into other denominations.
So we wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and we wanted to dig up some information that we could then present to either validate or disprove the claims that Tom had made. Tom Horn believed that he had found a secret location in D.C. where the Antichrist would be resurrected. This idea that the biblical narrative of the Antichrist is going to suffer a deadly wound, and then he's going to somehow be majestically, magically, supernaturally resurrected. And that was going to be a sign to the world that he is, in fact, a supernatural king. Now, what's crazy about the idea of a supernatural king is that this goes back to the writings of Manly P. Hall, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point today. But a supernatural king, that is exactly what the world will think when they see somebody rise from the dead. Matter of fact, Jesus Christ himself, when he rose from the dead, he brought back others with him. A lot of people don't realize that there was a multitude of people that came back with Jesus. And there's evidence that they died normal lives again. But regardless of that, Jesus did so many feats to prove who he was. Well, the Antichrist, the word anti means in place of, instead of. It can also mean against. But in the scenario of the biblical Antichrist, the one that's still to come, he is instead of Christ. He is a replacement Christ. He is a counterfeit Christ. So it makes perfect sense what the scripture says, that he will suffer a deadly wound and that he's going to come back. And the world is going to marvel at this. But the question is, what are the events going to be that surround this resurrection? Where is this resurrection going to take place? And where does America fit into the picture? These were questions that we needed answered as we set out on this project. Tom Horn was very confident, especially after learning the Masonic system listen, there's a Masonic conspiracy surrounding this specific location in Washington, D.C. We didn't actually get right into the chamber because it's hidden, it's locked, but we got pretty close. And while we were there, we had some very strange things happen that let us know that we were on the right track.
It's basically what started off at Babel. They had a one world system, religion, language, probably economy. They had a one world dictator, Nimrod, and they were, in defiance to God, they were going to build that tower to be able to go up there and, who knows, but God looked at it, and we know how that ended. He came down threw the smackdown. He threw the gauntlet down and said, it's not time. If I were to let this continue, then there's nothing that they wouldn't be able to do. There's elements that are controlling the scenes today, that are trying to fulfill all these esoteric prophecies. The same thing that Nimrod started to do. So you got to remember that Satan is the god of this world. Well, they were worshiping the fallen angels back then, right? They had the gods of old. These are the same ones that continue to be worshipped today by various different sects and leaders of government and the members of the deep state. That's why they do the rituals and what have you. But it started off back then, and these people that it's been passed down from generation to generation, this ideology, this belief system that this Antichrist, this Messiah, this person in place of Christ is going to come. And right now we're seeing that they're setting up his world kingdom to be taken over by him.
The nation of America has a hidden history that most people aren't really aware of. There's a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of ideas, but in reality, America, we have evidence that America, before it was called America, that it was known as this great Western hemisphere. Okay, the Western Hemisphere, that is what was prophesied by Plato. You had, even the Greek biographer Plutarch talked about voyages to this great land in the ancient world. So really, you got to get past this whole American mindset of Christopher Columbus and the Native American Indians. Governor DeWitt Clinton, former governor of New York, he was also held a prestigious role at the New York Historical Society. And he said on record that they had come into contact with ancient fortifications on our soil, and these fortifications were evidence that there was an advanced civilization far exceeding that of the Native American Indians right here in America. Now, this was on record with DeWitt Clinton. When you consider the fact that the types of news we get today versus the type of news that was, in the early part of this nation, it's totally different. It's all fake news today. All of it. All sides of it that you're going to get on TV. The old news that we found articles, we found all types of information showing that there was an ancient civilization here before the Native Americans, that there was this idea of serpent worship on this continent, and Plato himself, which Plato is a worldwide household name. Everyone knows who Plato is. Major occultist, democratic mindset. They believed that in the end times, there would be a great nation that was going to rise up in the Western Hemisphere. Again, the Western Hemisphere is the key. The great nation of the Western Hemisphere was going to rise up. It's going to take its rightful place as the beacon of light that was going to rule the world. It was going to bring about a philosophic empire, a one world philosophic empire, and it was going to be utilizing the creeds and the beliefs of the old pagan world. What does that mean in modern terms? It's going to be a resurrection of the old religions, the Babylonian mystery schools, the secret societies, the gods of old, possibly a reference even to the 72 fallen angels. When you start talking about the divine council, that there was going to be a resurrection of these things, a revival of these things, but specifically that this great nation. Now, when you look at the nation of America today, we literally fulfill so much of what the scripture teaches about this great whore of Babylon. And we break all this down in our film specifically so people can see history lined up with scripture. Why doesn't America show up in the Bible? Well, we believe it does. But you have to have eyes to see and you have to have ears to hear. You also have to have a better understanding of this nation, America. Now, let me take you back to some of these ancient views of America. The idea was we were going to be that nation that was going to bring about this democratic commonwealth to the world. Democracy, that was the goal of the ancient philosophers. Democracy was actually an occult view. Now, this might shock some people watching this video, but democracy is an occult view. It's all about bringing together a certain type of system. Now, you start studying the end times, you find out it's a beast system that's a control grid set up for everyone to be living under one basic ruler. Now, think about this. The Native Americans, we have evidence now that Native Americans that were here, not all of them, but by large, they had secret societies that were literally ancient forms of Freemasonry within their Native American tribes. Satanic rituals, blood rituals. We even have evidence of underground kivas, temples, which I'm sure you're familiar with when you get into the whole Four Corners conspiracy. All these things taking place on American soil. But interestingly, we find out that the God who they revered and worshipped, again, not all of them, but by majority, we're dealing with a serpent god, a plumed, feathered serpent god. The same god shows up in Mexico under the name Quetzalcoatl. You go down into Quiché. In Quiché, they called him Gucumatz, and then in Peru, they called him Amaru. Amaru is the root of the word America. Amaruca literally translates over the land of the plumed serpent. Now, when we get into Ephesians and we understand what spiritual warfare looks like, Paul tells us we're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're actually wrestling with principalities. Okay, these are fallen angel entities over nations, over land, over different areas. These are the things that affect what goes on underneath. These are fallen, by the way. These are not good entities. These are the higher entities that are in league with Satan. Now, I believe that the plumed serpent god is literally Satan himself. So when you consider that we are living on a land, a massive land in the Western Hemisphere, that the ancients all prophesied was going to be the land that was going to lead the world into a worldwide global democracy that was going to be a beacon of light, bringing about all the old religions and schools of the world. that really makes more sense now that we understand that our nation has been revering and worshiping Lucifer long before the Native Americans got here. They inherited these things from the giants, the white giants that were here before them, the advanced civilizations. And I'll even say this, Sir Francis Bacon, who I believe Francis Bacon was William Shakespeare. He penned the book, The New Atlantis. He believed that this land called North America, he believed that this was the site of the original Atlantis. He also believed that this land was going to be fulfilling major prophecies according to what he studied in the occult world, going all the way back to ancient Greece. So, interestingly, when you study the writings of the New Atlantis, you're going to find out that America has been fulfilling these prophecies. I mean, it makes perfect sense. So much so that the occultists, such as Manly P. Hall, who was a major theosophist, by the way, he taught that America was going to be that beacon of light in the last days. He said that this nation was literally going to be shining like a light on a hill, that we were going to shine across the world, and we were going to bring about the democratic commonwealth. We were going to bring about the old religions of the world, the superior ancient knowledge, and that we were going to be that nation that was spoken of by all the old mystics and the prophets of old. Now, part of that is also reviving the Egyptian mystery schools. All of these things have been fulfilled, but here's the thing. The secret societies, they have been maintaining the language, the rituals, the esoteric knowledge. They've been maintaining all of this secretly for thousands of years, passing it on. But they've also suffered persecution over the years. That's why they called them secret societies. They had to go into secrecy. They had to hide these things because they didn't want the common man to understand that. What's interesting about this is that the secret societies that rule America, that founded this nation, we believe that was the reason that they came here under the guise of freedom of religion. See, we've been taught that freedom of religion was all about Christians being able to worship freely. Well, this is a Christian nation, we've been told, founded by Christians, for Christians, by Christians. I can't think of a greater lie, a greater deception upon this nation other than freedom of religion was for us as Christians. Furthermore, we have come to the conclusion that the freedom of religion was a cloak that would allow all the secret societies to come and operate freely here, and even to set up policy. A lot of the policy that we've seen over the years was set with the mindset of protecting the secret societies, allowing them to get where they need to be so that they can operate and they can call down the gods of old.
So the deep state has three different levels. At first, you have the legislative branch and bureaucracy of spreading this ideology out on the world stage. Underneath that, you have the second level, which influences the first level. And so in that level, you have foreign governments, you have occult secret societies, your Skull and Bones, and et cetera. Then you also have your think tanks and all of those and rich globalists that want to see their agenda make it to affect that first level. So that's the second level, and they're all influencing the first level. Underneath that is the spirit realm. So these people that are in the secret societies and occultists and want to see it put out on the first level, the world stage, they're going and they're doing these rituals, and we choose Bohemian Grove for that purpose because we don't have enough time to break down every secret society and their purposes and whatever. Ultimately, their goal is all the same. But at Bohemian Grove, it's like where the walls come down. That's where the ritual aspect of things come, and the third level of the deep state. So the third level is tapping into the spirit realm to be able to get your power and to be able to get your direction. And that influences the second level, and that influences the first level. And that's how it goes across the world scene to be enacted. Ultimately, Luciferianism, Satanism, these rituals to tap into the other side to get their direction. It's kind of like being a Christian. God gives us certain guidelines in his book. It's our basic instructions before leaving Earth. It's our guidelines to be able to make it here, right? I mean, we're lost without that. And so he gives us certain criteria on how to pray, how to communicate, how to worship. He gave in the Old Testament very specifics about how to build the temple. It's just one example. And so when you're dealing with the occult side of things, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the occultists they're following just as diligently as a true believer of Christ follows him. submits their life to him, stays in the word, does lives the word, right? Just as that diligence is, they're just as diligent, but it's for the opposite side. So with the occult, you've got these practices that have been passed down for millennia. And these people that are in power today are still practicing the same things. They're still wanting to see this system come in so that they can have their final go at taking over this world, destroying Christianity. Ultimately, it's not against us. I mean, yes, it is against humanity, but ultimately it's against God.
People say, well, what about George Washington? Because he's touted as such a man of integrity. Matter of fact, there's records that he attended church regularly, a Christian church. There's also records that he and his pastor, there's letters that have been written. Matter of fact, Library of Congress is a prime field to be picking truthful pieces of fruit. You want to get fruitful research? Hey, go to the Library of Congress. What we find out is that the pastor, one of Washington's pastors, he said that overall, he spoke with Washington time and time again that Washington was a deist. Okay, Washington didn't want to have a problem with the guy. He wanted to continue going to the church because it was a political move. But in reality, Washington said he was a deist. They went back and forth on this matter. This has been documented historically. He was not a Christian. He was definitely a deist. Now, others will argue that Washington renounced the Masonic Lodge. Well, that's only a half-truth. Okay, he renounced the British Lodge. See, when he came over and started setting things up, like in this new era, if you will, he had to renounce the old to become part of the new. And so he was actually part of the Alexandrian Lodge. I forget the exact number of the lodge, but if you Google this, you're going to find out exactly which lodge Washington was a part of in Virginia. I think it might have been Lodge 122, but I forget. I don't want to quote that, but he renounced the British, joined on with the current lodge that was setting up in the New World. They were two separate systems. Now, they were very similar, but they were separate. Matter of fact, their idea was to come and set up a government here that was almost identical to the oligarchy that they left. See, most people don't realize that. They don't realize that Washington was part of a grand conspiracy to create basically a new oligarchy here, a government controlled by a few. And that's all historical. We document that in our film. But the idea was to set that up, but to give more freedoms. But it still allowed the elite to run everything that the government wants. Any move of the government, the elite were going to be involved. They were not going to allow the common man to make decisions. Matter of fact, when the Constitution and some of the founding documents were signed, those windows were locked. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, he came on record and he talked to us about this for the film. He points to the fact that the founding fathers were deep state, which we would call shadow government. Back to Washington. Washington was definitely a Freemason. Matter of fact, they cast sprigs of acacia at his Masonic funeral to signify him going on to the land of Osiris in the underworld. Now, they believed Osiris was already in the underworld, and they believed that Washington was the America's first Osiris, but he wasn't meant to be the final. He was meant to be a type. And we see that in how they went down and went through with his funeral. As a matter of fact, if you go back and study the death and the funerals of Washington, you're going to find out that there were two. You had two different eulogies. You want to look for the Masonic eulogy that was presented by Timothy Bigelow Jr. That literally paints the picture. Look, Washington was not just a porch mason. Okay, he knew what he was doing. He knew it. He was very much invested in this. We have evidence that not only was he a mason, but he was a mason in good standing all the way up until his death. A lot of people say he renounced the lodge. Again, he did, but it was the British Lodge, not the American Lodge. What's crazy about this is that he was literally being set up in a system that was a religious system that was set up to bring about the spirit of Osiris, a resurrected spirit, a reincarnated spirit, if you will, of Osiris to possess the ruler of this nation. Washington never made it to the crypt. They did not put him in the crypt that they built for him because we believe they didn't build it for him. They said they did. But it's kind of like the government says that they're building, these military bases, and then immediately they retire the military base after they build it because they had other plans for it. The government does this all the time. They set up the crypt of Washington. They installed it very much strategically, which we break down all the strategy involved here. The crypt of Washington is sitting it's a basement level of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This is literally a page out of ancient Egyptian magic. We break this down step by step by step in the film. We show everything, how you go up and you walk into the Capitol building. You look up, and what do you see in the dome? You see this thing called the apotheosis of George Washington. Now, if he really was a Christian, like so many people say, all you got to do is look up and see the heaven that George Washington is ascending into, which is painted on this massive mural, and he's surrounded by all the pagan gods. You say, well, why on earth, if Washington was a Christian, why would he be getting deified in the first place into a god? That's what the word apotheosis means. Literally, Washington becoming a god. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said that George Washington was becoming the Osiris. Now, pagan gods, what does this have to do with D.C.? Well, Thomas Jefferson literally designed this city to honor the old pantheon of pagan gods. This is on record at the Library of Congress. People can investigate what's called the most approved plan. They literally built this city to pull a line from the Ghostbusters, how they talk about drawing down the power on these certain buildings, cursed buildings, buildings that are set up for drawing down occult power. The city of D.C. literally was built as a massive ritualistic chessboard to do public rituals en masse. So the Washington Monument, people like to go and look at it. Everybody wants to see it, but they don't understand the history of it. But just the measurements alone should be enough to raise some question. It's 555 feet tall above ground, and the physics involved, in order to keep it from falling over, you have 111 feet inside the earth. So you're ending up with a totality of 666 feet total from tip to base inside the earth. But what's crazy about this is that in the base of it, they have inculcated the magic Apollonian square. Now, they believe that this square has a binding factor to it, that it can bind certain things. Some people call it a 666 square. We do a full breakdown of this in the film, and the 666 square, basically what you end up with is that no matter how you add up the numbers in any of the lines, you end up with 111, with a total number of 666. So what's crazy is that they believe it's a binding utility, but it also goes back to some prophecies about the resurrection of Apollo. Now, the same entity that we would call Apollo, others call Osiris. So there's a connection there. Apollo and Osiris are the same entity. It's just from two different parts of the world. People can go back and look into the Sibylline prophecies. They can understand that this is a very real connection. The Masonic Lodge has that same 666 square and the skylight of their ritual chamber, which we show in the film, surrounded by the 33rd degree Freemasonic emblems of ISIS. And what's crazy is that directly beneath that 666 square, you have their altar with the holy books, including the Bible. They believe that by putting the Bible underneath this square, that it's binding the power and influence of the Word of God. But it doesn't stop there. There's a secret Bible bound in the testes of the Washington Monument. This Bible was what Dan Brown called the lost symbol. See, people have no idea how these books and this pop culture, such as Dan Brown and others, how they're conditioning us to what's really going on. They're pre-programming us to accept these things. The Dan Brown lost symbol was a Bible, a Masonic Bible, that's bound in the testes of the Washington Monument beneath a 12-foot mini obelisk. Most people don't even know about the 12-foot mini obelisk. We were able to get photos from when they did some renovation work over there. Matter of fact, Atlas Obscura got their hands on the photos, and that's where we first heard about the 12-foot obelisk. No one else knew about it. If you look down at the base of the main obelisk, you have what looks like a sewage hole, a manhole with a metal cover. You pull that thing up, which you can't, but they did, and we got footage of all of this. They pulled it up, and sure enough, you've got a 12-foot mini obelisk. 12 is a mockery of the number of disciples of Jesus Christ. It's also in the occult world, that's the number of the perfect government that they believe that's going to be set up in the Novus Ordo Seclorum. Now, what is the Novus Ordo Seclorum? That is Latin for the new order of the ages. Anybody that carries around a dollar bill in their pocket, pull it out, you'll see the pyramid, you'll see the Novus Ordo Seclorum. That was what this was all about. The founders of this nation knew that this was the land prophesied by the old mystics. They wanted to resurrect their old gods right here on this land, and they knew for a fact that this would be the continent that was going to lead the world in this Novus Ordo Seclorum. I definitely believe that rituals are utilized to obtain technology. You know, we do a whole breakdown in our film, Hollow Earth Chronicles, about how the Nazis had this secret group of women known as the Vril Maidens, and they would embark on seances, and in those seances, they would begin to automatic write, and they would get information in other languages. Matter of fact, the blueprints given to the Nazis did not for the bell. The Nazis had this craft called the bell, or the Die Glocke. That information did not just get given to one person. It actually got given in two separate events in two separate languages. It was years later that they decoded those languages and realized it was all one document, and it was the blueprints for what they believed to be some type of a time machine UFO. Some believe it was a time machine. Some believe it was just a flying craft. But yeah, I believe the technology is oftentimes given through satanic rituals and seances. But what I see more is the power and the atmospheric shifts that are taking place through these rituals that are changing the course of the direction of America.
Bohemian Grove has the massive ritual that takes place out there on a yearly basis. And this was blown open by Alex Jones. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen the dark secrets inside Bohemian Grove. We use a little clip documenting his interview with David Gergen. We chose the David Gergen Street interview to validate, to show that Bohemian Grove is real, to show the secrecy involved in the participants that are members there, and also to show that the ritual is in fact true, that people participate in this. And this is precedents from times past. You know, this is going back to late 1800s, early 1900s. We have in the film, we have a whole bunch of images, of pictures that were photographs that were taken. And it shows this ritual and the different things and practices that took place out there. But to go back to your question about the rituals, the big one that they do there on a yearly basis is the cremation of care. And there's a big giant stone owl out there. And it's very, the only way I can describe it is that it's a high place. It's equivalent to a high place of the Old Testament. It's literally, you're in the groves, you've got your altar set up, sacrifices being done there. And I'm not here to say if it's mock sacrifice or if it's real. I personally believe that it would be real if you're getting the leaders of the world to come out on a yearly basis to go there and to participate in this. I would think that it would be real. Also because of, with it being truly satanic and Luciferian and fulfilling those esoteric belief systems, it would only make sense. Blood is required and high-level rituals to be able to engage the other side. So it would only make sense that they're truly doing rituals out there. But that's the reason we went to Bohemian Grove in the film, is not physically, but while we covered that topic, is just because that's it's an encompassing of your secret societies, your occult systems, but it also shows that the higher ups, the people that are making policy, not just in America, but for the world, they meet out there and they do these things.
There's a very strange ritual that dates back to ancient Egypt, known as the Osiris Rising, or the Rising of Osiris ritual. You'll see it listed in different names on the internet, probably. Osiris, he had a conspirator named Set, and Set wanted to do away with Osiris. So he had him cut up into 14 pieces. Now his body's cut up into 14 pieces. It gets thrown into the Nile River. And Isis, of course, isn't happy about this. Isis tries to collect all the pieces up, and she's only able to find 13 pieces. So she fashions together those 13 pieces to form a more perfect union, which is the framework of our 13 colonies, a more perfect union, based off of the myth of Osiris. Now that's showing Egyptian magic even in the framework and the fabric of our foundation, right? It's not an accident that they brought together 13 colonies to form a more perfect union. That was all by design. It was all manufactured. But what's crazy is that she fashions together these 13 pieces, but guess what piece is missing? His genitals. So what do? They set up this ritual. That's what the obelisk is, by the way. The obelisk represents the 14th piece that they couldn't find. It is literally a phallic symbol. You find it in the Vatican. You find it in ancient Egypt. You find it here in the States. You find it all over cemeteries. You find it all over the Masonic lodges. It represents the phallic, the male sex organ of Osiris. And they believe by setting up this ritual, now it's all a recreation of the original ritual that took place between Isis and the 13 pieces of Osiris, which we break down the full ritual in the film. Tom Horn breaks it down right there in the mall area of DC, right between the Washington Monument, and the Dome of Isis, which is the Capitol building. Now, this is fascinating because the original ritual had to take place between what we would, in a courtyard, between a dome and an obelisk. Putting those two together like that creates a power generator, literally a generator for this ritual. And the idea is that the seed of Osiris, the seed, is going to come up and emit out of the phallic symbol, which is the Washington Monument, and it's going to take over whoever our president is. Now, this sounds crazy, but think about this. In ancient Egypt, what had happened was the pharaoh would go through this ritual. He would enter in a man, and he would exit the ritual a god. That was their belief. And they believed that their pharaoh was literally the embodiment of Osiris because of that ritual. They were calling him up out of the underworld. So what we have in America is this same ritual, basically, that the Freemasons believe that they have maintained the proper language and the ritual to a T from the ancient world. They claim to have this still today at the inauguration of every U.S. president. The president is up there, right there between the dome and the obelisk, right there in that power generator, and right around the corner at the Herodome, which is what they call the Masonic Mecca of the world, literally. The Herodome is this temple, this massive, crazy temple in D.C. They are up there beneath that magic square we were talking about, that magic 666 square, binding the influence and the power of the Word of God. They believe they're binding the power of the Bible while they do this ritual. And they are literally doing the raising of Osiris ritual while the presidential inauguration happens at every election. And they are literally calling on the spirit of Osiris to raise up, or Apollo, however you want to slice it, to come out of the underworld and to possess the president. So the president-elect walks into this ritual a man, exits the ritual a god. This is what the Freemasons believe. Now, people are going to say, well, not every president's a Freemason. Well, most of them have ties to secret societies, but they're not all conscious of the ritual. Doesn't matter. This ritual takes place every inauguration. The Freemasons hold to this. Here's one thing I want to point out about this. The ritual that takes place there, it's been going on now since the beginning, to our knowledge, since the beginning of this nation being set up. They believe that it's going to stick eventually. See, they don't know which president is going to be the final Osiris. Now, they believed in the foundation of this nation that Washington was a type. He was the first Osiris. Technically, every president in their eyes is an Osiris. But the crazy thing is that not every time the ritual is going to stick. They have to keep doing it until it actually sticks and they get that one that they've been waiting for. This is kind of like when we talk about Babylon working. How many years was Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard working in the desert trying to get this ritual to stick? They do this at the inauguration of every U.S. president because they believe there is going to come a time in a president that will be the one. He will be the one, and they will go through this ritual when his body lies in state in the Capitol Dome. I believe they're going to do this ritual, and that final raising ritual, that's going to be the one that's going to stick. I don't believe it's going to stick when they're doing it at an inauguration. The real one's going to take place when this Antichrist man dies. They lay him in state in the Capitol building beneath the 72 pentagrams and the apotheosis of George Washington. And that's not it. There's so much more numerology about the Capitol building and the 13 statues and the statutory hall. But I believe that's the real ritual. That's the one where he's going to raise, where the spirit of Osiris, which the Bible talks about this Apollyon coming up from the bottomless pit.
When you visit DC, it feels like you're walking through Rome with all the architecture and all the pagan idols and the statues, the monuments, even down to, and Justin mentioned this about the Roman Pantheon being recreated and shepherded by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wanted to see reconstructed pagan temples to the old gods. He wanted that to be what you see. That's when you're walking down DC, this is what you're going to see, and he was successful in that. Being raised to think that America was built as a Christian nation, you would expect to see crosses. You would expect to see statues of apostles. I don't know. That's just what I have in my mind. If you're going to go, you're going to see some representation of that, and you don't see any of that there. Like it really feels like you're walking in Rome, because you've got all of the structures that are there, and the statues of the deities and what have you. And so with DC, it was set up specifically for that purpose, to pay homage to these pagan gods and goddesses. That should be a red flag for many people. But to look at the structure of it, the way that they set up things on purpose, you can look at it, and everybody knows about the pentagrams. And a lot of people will look down and say, even with the pentagram that's on the street layout, they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, well, it's not a complete pentagram because it's missing a leg. Well, if you do any research on that, you'll actually find out that that's even a more powerful pentagram in the occult than a completed one is. So with that set up there, with the whole, the layout of the streets and the roads and the buildings being charged, being set up for the pagan gods and goddesses, it's done for a specific purpose, to be able to harness power and give direction. The purpose behind it is actually for rituals, for ritual purposes, to be able to harness the power of Osiris, for example, as we talked about with the inauguration of every U.S. president, and calling down that, or calling up the seat of Osiris to allow the government to have a divine representation. And that goes all the way back to the Pharaoh in Egypt.
Interesting. I had somebody send me a video of, lightning striking the Washington Monument just here recently. It was a big deal. I don't think it did any damage. I don't know. I didn't really look into it. But the video that I saw, and I suggest somebody, everybody look into this. Look at the video of the recent Washington Monument getting struck by lightning. That's what they're calling it, by the way. All I could think about was, this looks like a massive ritual is happening right now. Like, this doesn't just look like lightning striking something. This looks like some Ghostbusters satanic ritual taking place, drawing down the power. I'm not saying that's what was going on, but that's the first thing that crossed my mind as I saw this video footage. So I think that it's possible that, everything going on right now, we're really starting to reevaluate how things are going to look in the end times because of all the things happening, all the propaganda going on right now with this whole coronavirus scare. It's changing the way that we're seeing some of these things. So I don't know for sure how it's going to look, but the best thing I could say is that it lines up with scripture. It might appear a little bit different. We're going to see things more clearly as the days unfold. A matter of fact, I've said this before, 100 years ago, the best Bible scholars could not have seen the type of prophecy being fulfilled that we're seeing today. They wouldn't have understood it. Like, we understand prophecy better now because we've seen so much more unfold. So I think as we get closer, we're going to recognize that. But it's all stepping towards the New World Order. They want the New World Order, and the New World Order is actually seen as a good thing in their eyes. They see it as spreading the democratic commonwealth everywhere. They see it as bringing about that old form of supernatural government in the occult world and setting that up for the New World, so that we can all live under this new Atlantis. That's literally the goal that we're heading towards.
The end goal of all this is to bring about this final world system of the Antichrist so that he can reign. We talk about globalization in the film, and we interviewed someone that was part of the United Federalists. And he's an independent. He's a strong believer. Carl Teichgrub, love him to death. And he talks about an experience that he had going to a UN meeting as an independent of the World Federalists. And they were handed this book, this little booklet, and it talked about the need for a world king. How do you look at that? It sounds very familiar and reminiscent of the Antichrist, a world king, a world dictator. I think the things that we're seeing today is setting the stage for that. As we document in Belly of the Beast, they're having to implode America from the inside in order to bring it down so that they can have a global agenda being fulfilled, so that order out of chaos. There's all these things that we're seeing being fulfilled today. It's because of these people following the orders that they get from their rituals, using the power that they've obtained to be able to bring this about. They're hell bent on seeing this come to pass. And the end deal, I mean, if you look at what the Bible says about it, we're living in these times. Matthew 24 is even more applicable today than it was when it was written. The book of Revelation, same thing, all of it really. It's more applicable today, and it's necessary that we're standing strong in that and standing steadfast in it. Because without it, what hope do we have? Without it, it's going to be like the people taking a knee to Baal. You know, they're going to see this supernatural world king come in, who's going to be filled with the spirit of Satan, literally embodied inside of this human being. So he's going to be doing lying signs and wonders. He's going to have the answers that everybody needs to bring peace in. And the way that you do that is you have to have this problem. This is the Hegelian dialectic. You have this solution that you want to get to. So you create a problem, get the people to react and say, hey, we need to go. Somebody needs to do something about this. And so they'll gladly accept what the end is. They'll gladly accept this next solution. Kind of like, let's use it with the police system right now. Well, we need to defund the police. We really need to go do something about this. Okay, well, we've actually got this new police set up over here, you know? And so they've got these new laws and guidelines. We've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. So here, take this new police. Well, that's also, part of this one world system that we've been looking at for a long time. What we can expect is a one world currency. We're seeing the economic system just go to crap because middle class or middle America has not been able to work. We're seeing the implosion of the dollar take place right now because of middle class America not being able to work and provide for themselves. We're seeing people being more dependent on the government to give them help. The elitists, they've already got all the money in the world, so they're sitting back just, watching it go to hell.
The first thing I think that people need to take away is that we've been lied to. A lot of people get offended when you start talking about these types of issues. In Proverbs, it says, a fool is going to discount a topic without looking into it. And that's what I see in America. I see a lot of Americans, and they're just quick to discount things, write you off without even looking into it. Those people who refuse the truth, they're going to be given over to a reprobate mind. They're going to be deceived. And I tell people, you don't have to be deceived. We're living in an age of technology. We're living in an age of information. We can just go to the Library of Congress. We can just go research these things. And so I tell people, take from this film real information, let it change your paradigm if need be, and move forward without having scales on your eyes. Look, we don't know how much time we have on this earth, but we do know that Jesus is going to return. When he does, we need to make sure that we're in good standing with him. We need to make sure that we are not deceived by this global scheme of the Antichrist.